They cornered her in the alley, and she knew she was in real trouble. Desperation made her bold. She turned to the stranger in the shadows and begged him for help, her voice trembling with fear. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just pleaded with was the city's most feared mafia boss. And now he'd never let her go. The cold October rain turned the narrow alley into a maze of shadows and danger. Elena Martinez clutched her purse tighter as she hurried through the darkness, her sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the flickering streetlight at the alley's mouth. She should have taken the main street home from her night shift at Murphy's Diner, but the shortcut through downtown Chicago's warehouse district would save her 20 minutes. 20 minutes she desperately needed to check on her mother's medication. She never saw them coming. Well, look what we got here. 3 men stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking her path. The leader, a man with a spider tattoo crawling up his neck, smiled with teeth that caught the dim light like broken glass. His companions flanked him, their leather jackets creaking as they moved closer. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't have any money." "Oh, sweetheart," Spider Tattoo laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "This ain't about your tips from slinging coffee. This is about family business." Her blood turned to ice. "I don't understand." "Your stepbrother Danny sure does." The man on the left cracked his knuckles. "Kid's got expensive habits and cheap excuses. Owes our boss 30 grand, plus interest. Since Danny's disappeared like smoke, guess who's gonna pay up?" I'm not responsible for Danny's problems." Elena backed against the brick wall, feeling the cold stone through her thin waitress uniform. "I haven't seen him in months." "Family's family, princess." Spider Tattoo pulled out a switchblade, the metal singing as it opened. "Your mama's got that nice little flower shop on Maple Street, right? Be a real shame if something happened to it. Or to her." Elena's vision blurred with tears. Her mother was already fighting cancer, couldn't handle stress, couldn't lose the shop that had been her life's work. "Please, I'm begging you.
Give me time.
I'll figure something out, Time's up, sweetheart. Is there a problem here?" The voice cut through the alley like a blade through silk, low, controlled, and carrying an authority that made even the 3 men pause. Elena turned toward the sound and saw a figure emerge from the deeper shadows near the fire escape. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the fluid grace of someone completely unafraid. The stranger stepped into the weak circle of light, and Elena's breath caught. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair slightly tousled by the rain, and eyes so pale blue they seemed almost silver. His expensive black coat was perfectly tailored, and everything about him screamed money and power. But it was something else that made the 3 thugs suddenly look uncertain, something dangerous and predatory in the way he carried himself. "This don't concern you, fancy boy," Spider Tattoo said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Keep walking." The stranger tilted his head slightly, as if considering the suggestion. Then he smiled, and Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. It was the kind of smile a shark might wear. "Actually," he said, his voice still unnaturally calm, "I think it does." What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but Elena would replay it in slow motion for years to come. The stranger moved like liquid lightning. Spider Tattoo lunged with his switchblade, but the stranger was already inside his reach, one hand closing around the thug's wrist with an audible crack. The knife clattered to the wet pavement as Spider Tattoo screamed. The second man rushed forward, throwing a wild punch. The stranger ducked smoothly, drove his elbow into the attacker's solar plexus, then grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the opposite wall. The impact echoed through the alley like thunder. The third thug was already running. "Wait," the stranger called softly and impossibly. The fleeing man stopped mid-stride and turned back, his face pale with terror. "You forgot to apologize to the lady." "I'm sorry," the man gasped. "We're sorry. We won't bother her again, I swear." The stranger looked at Spider Tattoo, who was cradling his broken wrist and whimpering. "And you?" "Sorry," Spider Tattoo mumbled. "Real sorry. We got the wrong girl, wrong family. Won't happen again." No, the stranger agreed pleasantly. It won't. He leaned closer to Spider Tattoo, and though Elena couldn't hear what he whispered, she saw the color drain from the thug's face. Now get out of my sight. All of you. They stumbled over each other in their haste to escape, leaving Elena alone in the alley with her mysterious savior. For a moment, they stood in silence, the only sounds the dripping of rain and Elena's ragged breathing. The stranger picked up the dropped switchblade, closed it with a sharp click, and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning those pale blue eyes on her. Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. The stranger noticed and shrugged out of his expensive coat, draping it around her shoulders. It was warm and smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something darker and more complex. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I don't know how to. God, if you hadn't been here." "But I was here," he said simply. "That's what matters." Elena looked up at his face, trying to memorize the features of the man who had saved her life. There was something about him that didn't quite fit: the expensive clothes, the way he moved, the fact that 3 armed thugs had fled from him like he was the devil himself. But his eyes, when they looked at her, held something almost gentle. "I'm Elena," she said. He was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if he would tell her his name. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "You should get home, Elena. It's not safe out here. But how can I thank you? I mean, really thank you?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "No thanks necessary. Just be careful. The city can be dangerous for someone like you." He turned to go, and Elena felt a sudden, inexplicable panic at the thought of him disappearing into the shadows as mysteriously as he had appeared. "Wait," she called out. Will I see you again?" He paused at the mouth of the alley, his silhouette framed against the distant streetlight. When he looked back at her, Elena could swear she saw something like longing in those pale blue eyes. "Maybe," he said. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with his coat and 100 questions she couldn't answer. Elena pulled the expensive fabric closer around herself and started the long walk home, never suspecting that the man who had saved her life was Matteo Romano, the most feared name in Chicago's underworld, and that her simple plea for help had just changed both their lives forever. Elena climbed the creaking stairs to the third-floor apartment she shared with her mother, each step echoing through the narrow hallway of their rundown building. The stranger's coat still hung around her shoulders like a protective shield, but as she fumbled for her keys, reality crashed back down on her with crushing weight. The door stuck. It always did when it rained, and she had to shoulder it open, revealing the cramped space that had been home for the past 2 years. Peeling wallpaper, a kitchen faucet that dripped no matter how tightly she turned it, and furniture that belonged in a thrift store's reject pile. But it was clean, and it was theirs, and Elena had fought tooth and nail to keep it that way. "Mija?" came a weak voice from the bedroom. "Is that you?" "Yes, Mama. I'm home." Elena hung the expensive coat carefully on the back of a chair, her fingers lingering on the soft fabric. In the harsh light of the apartment's single overhead bulb, it looked even more out of place, like a piece of another world had followed her home. Maria Martinez appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a faded pink bathrobe that had seen better years. At 52, she looked older, the cancer treatments having stolen the color from her cheeks and the thickness from her once beautiful hair. But her dark eyes still held the same warmth that had carried Elena through childhood. "You're later than usual," Maria said, settling carefully into her worn armchair. "Everything okay at the diner?" Elena forced a smile, pushing the alley encounter deep into the back of her mind. Her mother had enough to worry about without knowing her daughter had been threatened by thugs demanding money for Danny's debts. "Just a busy night. How are you feeling? Did you take your medicine?" "Like a good girl," Maria smiled, but Elena caught the way she pressed her hand to her side. The pain was getting worse, even if Mama tried to hide it. "There's leftover rice and beans on the stove if you're hungry." Elena's stomach growled, reminding her she'd only managed a few bites of a sandwich during her break, but she shook her head. I'll eat something later. You should rest. As her mother retreated to the bedroom, Elena slumped onto the couch and stared at the stack of bills weighing down the coffee table like an anchor. Electric bill, past due. Rent, due in 3 days. Hospital bills from her mother's last treatment. The numbers so large they might as well have been written in a foreign language. She opened her purse and counted the night's tips, $43.67. On a good night, she might make 60. The math was simple and brutal. No matter how many double shifts she worked, no matter how many corners she cut, they were drowning inch by inch. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Elena's heart sank when she saw Danny's name on the screen. Hey sis, need to crash for a few days. Got some business to take care of. Don't wait up. Elena stared at the message until the words blurred. Danny Martinez, not really her brother, but her mother's dead husband's son from his first marriage, had been nothing but trouble since the day they'd taken him in 4 years ago. He was 25 now, old enough to take responsibility for his life, but he still treated their home like a hotel and their family like a bank account he could drain whenever he pleased. She thought about the men in the alley, about how they'd mentioned $30,000. 30,000. The number made her feel sick. Elena made maybe $18,000 a year at the diner, working every shift she could get. Even if she didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't spend a penny on herself, it would take her nearly 2 years to earn that much money. And now those men thought she was responsible for it. Elena pulled the stranger's coat closer around herself, breathing in that complex scent that somehow made her feel safer. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently, the way 3 grown men had fled from him like children running from a nightmare. Who was he? Some kind of cop? Security specialist? Rich businessman who'd taken martial arts classes. But cops didn't wear $1,000 coats, and businessmen didn't make hardened criminals wet themselves with a whispered threat. Her phone rang, jerking her out of her thoughts. Unknown number. Hello, she answered cautiously. Heavy breathing then. You got lucky tonight, princess. But luck runs out. Elena's blood turned to ice. Who is this? This ain't over. Your stepbrother's debt ain't going anywhere, and neither are we. That fancy boyfriend of yours won't always be around to save you. The line went dead. Elena sat frozen, the phone trembling in her hand. They were still watching her, still targeting her. The encounter in the alley hadn't been random at all. It had been calculated, planned. They'd known exactly where to find her, exactly when she'd be vulnerable. And they'd be back. She thought about calling the police, but what could she tell them? That her stepbrother owed money to criminals and they were threatening her? The cops would want details she didn't have, evidence she couldn't provide. They'd tell her to stay safe and file a report that would disappear into a stack of similar reports from people who couldn't afford justice. Elena locked the front door and checked it twice, then wedged a chair under the handle. She turned off all the lights and peered through the blinds at the street below. A black sedan sat parked under the broken streetlight, its occupants invisible behind tinted windows. They were watching, waiting. In her bedroom, she could hear her mother's labored breathing, punctuated by the occasional cough that seemed to echo through the thin walls. Maria Martinez was fighting for her life already. She couldn't handle the stress of knowing her family was being stalked by criminals. Elena wrapped the stranger's coat around herself like armor and sank onto the couch, staring at her phone. She had the sudden, desperate urge to call someone. But who? She had no one else. No father, no extended family, no friends close enough to involve in something this dangerous. Just her dying mother, and a stepbrother whose reckless choices had painted a target on their backs. As the night stretched on, Elena watched the black sedan and wondered if the mysterious man with the pale blue eyes would really come back to save her if she called his name into the darkness. Because something told her she was going to need a miracle. She just didn't know that her miracle came with a price tag written in blood. The Romano estate sat like a fortress in the hills overlooking Chicago, its iron gates and stone walls keeping the world at bay. Matteo's Bentley purred up the circular drive past perfectly manicured gardens that hid security cameras in every shadow. To outsiders, it looked like old money and respectability. To those who knew better, it was the headquarters of the most powerful crime family in the Midwest. Matteo Romano walked through his mansion's marble foyer, still tasting the October rain on his lips. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, appeared with practiced silence to take his coat, but he waved her away. The expensive fabric still carried Elena's scent, something clean and honest that didn't belong in his world of blood and shadows. Mr. Romano? Vincent Torino, his underboss, emerged from the study with the cautious respect of a man who'd survived 20 years in the family business. The counsel's waiting in the conference room. They want to discuss the Castellano situation. Matteo nodded, but his mind wasn't on family business. He was thinking about dark eyes wide with gratitude instead of terror, about a woman who'd looked at him like he was a hero instead of a monster. In his 40 years of life, 30 of them spent climbing the bloody ladder of organized crime. No one had ever thanked him for violence. The conference room occupied the mansion's east wing, its long mahogany table polished to mirror brightness. 5 men sat around it, the inner circle of the Romano family, each one a predator who'd clawed his way to the top of Chicago's underworld. They stood as Matteo entered, a gesture of respect that was also a reminder of the power he wielded. Gentlemen, Matteo took his seat at the head of the table, his mind split between the present moment and the memory of Elena's trembling voice. Vincent says you have concerns about the Castellanos. Damn right we do, growled Tony Marcelli, his consigliera. At 65, Tony had survived 5 different bosses and 2 federal investigations. He had the scars and paranoia to prove it. Word is they're moving product through our territory again. Testing us. Their soldiers hit 3 of our bookies this week, added Jimmy Torino, Vincent's younger brother, and the family's enforcer. They're getting bold, boss. Think maybe we're going soft. Matteo's pale blue eyes swept the table, reading the tension in his men's faces. The Castellano family had been rivals for decades, their territories separated by an invisible line that ran through Chicago's heart. Lately, that line had been shifting, and blood was the currency of negotiation. What do you recommend? Matteo asked, though his thoughts drifted to a narrow alley where 3 thugs had learned the price of threatening innocence. We hit them hard, Jimmy said, his scarred knuckles rapping against the table. Take out a few of their lieutenants. Remind them why they should stay on their side of the line. Agreed, nodded Sal Benedetti, the family's money man. We've been too quiet lately. Silence breeds stupidity in men like the Castellanos. Matteo listened to the familiar rhythm of violence and strategy, but part of him remained in that alley, remembering the way Elena had looked at him without fear. When was the last time someone had seen him as anything other than a threat to be avoided or a power to be courted? Boss. Tony's gravelly voice cut through his distraction. You with us? Always, Matteo's attention snapped back to the room, his expression hardening into the mask he'd worn for so long it felt like a second skin. Jimmy, take care of the Castellano problem. Make it clean, but visible. We're not animals, but we're not sheep either. What about their operation on the docks? Vincent asked. Our sources say they're expecting a big shipment next week. Intercept it, Matteo decided. But I want information more than blood. Find out who's backing them, where their money's coming from. The Castellanos aren't smart enough to organize this expansion on their own. The meeting continued for another hour, covering territory disputes, police payoffs, and the delicate balance of power that kept Chicago's underworld from exploding into open war. But Matteo's mind kept drifting to Elena Martinez, the way she'd clutched his coat around herself, the genuine gratitude in her voice when she'd thanked him. After dismissing his counsel, Matteo retreated to his private office, a sanctuary lined with first-edition books and expensive bourbon. He poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights below. Somewhere down there, Elena was probably struggling to sleep, still shaken by her encounter with the Castellano enforcers. Because that's what they'd been. He was sure of it now. The spider tattoo on the leader's neck was a Castellano marking, and their mention of $30,000 suggested they were collecting on family business. But what was Elena's connection? The stepbrother they'd mentioned, probably another gambler or a junkie who'd borrowed from the wrong people. Matteo pulled out his encrypted phone and speed-dialed a familiar number. Giancarlo. It's me, Matteo said. I need you to look into someone. Elena Martinez works at Murphy's Diner downtown. Find out everything, family, debts, connections. Be discreet. A pause. Giancarlo Rossi was the family's information broker, a man who could uncover anyone's secrets for the right price. He was also smart enough not to ask unnecessary questions. How deep you want me to go, boss? Deep enough to keep her safe. Another pause, longer this time. In the Romano family, personal interest was weakness, and weakness was fatal. Boss, you sure about this? Getting involved with civilians. Just do it. Matteo cut him off. And Giancarlo? I want protection on her. Rotating shifts, 24/7. Invisible but effective. Consider it done. Matteo hung up and returned to his window, his reflection staring back like an accusation. He was putting resources toward protecting a woman he'd known for less than an hour, a woman who represented everything soft and vulnerable that had no place in his world. His counsel would call it foolishness. His enemies would call it weakness. But when Elena had looked at him with gratitude instead of fear, something had stirred in the darkness of his chest, something he'd thought the years had killed. For 30 seconds in that alley, he hadn't been Matteo Romano, feared boss of Chicago's most powerful crime family. He'd been a man protecting a woman who needed him. And now he couldn't let her go. The city sprawled beneath him, full of potential threats and hidden dangers. But somewhere in that maze of lights and shadows, Elena Martinez was sleeping under his protection, whether she knew it or not. Matteo Romano had built an empire on fear and respect, but tonight he was discovering the terrible power of something far more dangerous: hope. 3 blocks from the Romano estate, in a warehouse that reeked of motor oil and stale cigarettes, Marco Castellano stared at his 3 enforcers with the kind of rage that made grown men pray for quick deaths. Spider, real name Pete Kowalski, sat hunched in a folding chair with his broken wrist cradled against his chest, while his 2 companions flanked him like guilty children. Run that by me again, Marco said, his voice deadly quiet. At 45, he'd spent half his life climbing the Castellano family ladder, and every scar on his face told a story of violence survived. You're telling me that Matteo Romano, the Matteo Romano, just happened to be taking a midnight stroll through that alley? It wasn't random, boss, Spider wheezed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the warehouse's chill. Had to be planned. He was waiting for us. Waiting, Marco repeated, beginning to pace. The most powerful crime boss in Chicago was waiting in an alley to rescue some nobody waitress from my territory. He stopped, fixing Spider with pale green eyes that had watched men die. You realize how stupid that sounds. I'm telling you what happened. Spider protested. The guy moved like he was born to it. Knew exactly how to hurt us without killing us. And the way he talked to us, Spider shivered. Like we were insects he could squash anytime he felt like it. Tommy Castellano, Marco's younger brother and the family strategist, looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching all morning. Actually, it might not be as crazy as it sounds at 38. Tommy had the kind of analytical mind that turned violence into chess moves. I've been digging into this Elena Martinez, and there's more here than meets the eye. Marco stopped pacing. Talk to me. Elena Martinez, 24, works double shifts at Murphy's Diner on State Street. Lives with her sick mother in a 3rd-floor walk-up in Pilsen. No criminal record, no connections to our world. Tommy paused, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. But her stepbrother Daniel Martinez is a different story. The deadbeat who owes us 30 large, Marco nodded. What about him? Danny's been gambling at underground poker games for 2 years. Started small, but kept doubling down when he lost. Our books show he's into us for 29,800 plus interest that's been compounding for 6 months. So he owes us money. Big deal. Half of Chicago owes somebody money. Tommy turned the laptop screen toward his brother. But look where Danny's been playing. Romano territory. Every single game. And 3 of those games were in buildings that Matteo's family owns. Marco's eyes narrowed. The implications hit him like a punch to the gut. You're saying Romano knew about the debt? I'm saying Romano knew about Danny Martinez long before tonight. Which means he knew about Elena Martinez. Tommy pulled up another screen. And there's more. Danny disappeared 4 days ago. Word is he skipped town owing money to 3 different families, including ours. But Elena doesn't know that. She's still going to work, still taking care of her dying mother, still believing her stepbrother's problems won't touch her. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and Spider's labored breathing. Marco felt the familiar thrill that came with seeing an opportunity others missed. In their world, information was power, and power was everything. You think Romano's been watching the girl? He asked. I think Romano's been planning this whole thing from the beginning, Tommy replied. Think about it. He lets Danny rack up debts all over town, then positions himself to be Elena's savior when we come collecting. Classic manipulation. Make the target dependent on you, grateful to you. Marco's scarred face split into a predatory grin. And now she's his weakness. Exactly. Tommy closed the laptop with a snap. For 30 years, Matteo Romano has been untouchable because he cares about nothing and no one. But if he's willing to break cover for this girl, then she's leverage, Marco finished. Hurt her, and he bleeds. More than that, Tommy continued, his strategist's mind racing ahead. If we can prove Romano's been manipulating the Martinez family from the beginning, we turn Elena against him. Make her see him as the monster who destroyed her stepbrother and put her family in danger. Marco began pacing again, but this time with purpose instead of rage. What do we know about the mother? Maria Martinez, 52, stage 3 breast cancer. Owns a small flower shop on Maple Street that's barely breaking even. Medical bills are drowning them. Tommy pulled up financial records that shouldn't have been accessible to anyone outside law enforcement. Elena's working herself to death trying to keep them afloat. Perfect. Marco's grin widened. Desperate people make stupid choices. And stupid choices get people killed. He turned to Spider and his companions, his voice taking on the authority that had kept him alive in Chicago's underworld for 2 decades. I want round-the-clock surveillance on Elena Martinez. Where she works, where she lives, where she shops for groceries. But stay invisible. Romano's probably got protection on her already. What about the stepbrother? Asked Vince Moretto, one of Spider's companions who'd remained silent until now. Find Danny Martinez, Marco ordered. I don't care if you have to turn over every rock in Chicago. That junkie's going to help us whether he wants to or not. Tommy looked up from his laptop again. There's something else. Elena's mother, the flower shop, is 3 months behind on rent. The building's owned by a holding company, but I can trace it back to Romano interests if I dig deep enough. Do it, Marco said immediately. If Romano owns her mother's building, then he's been pulling strings longer than we thought. Elena Martinez isn't just his weakness. She's been his project from day 1. As his men dispersed to carry out their orders, Marco remained in the warehouse, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, Matteo Romano was probably congratulating himself on his clever manipulation of an innocent family. The great puppet master, thinking no one could see his strings. But Marco Castellano had built his reputation on finding weaknesses in seemingly untouchable enemies. And Elena Martinez, sweet, grateful, naive Elena Martinez, was about to become the weapon that brought down the Romano Empire. After all, the most effective bullets were the ones the target never saw coming. Elena was restocking the coffee station at Murphy's Diner when her phone rang with her mother's ringtone. The panic in Maria Martinez's voice made Elena's blood turn to ice. Mija, they broke the windows. They broke everything. Her mother's words came through tears and gasping breaths. The flowers, All my beautiful flowers. Mama, slow down. What happened? Where are you? At the shop. Oh, Elena, they destroyed it all. 20 years of building this business, and The line crackled with interference, then Maria's voice returned, smaller and more frightened. They said this was just the beginning. They said to tell you that family debts don't disappear. Elena's hands shook as she untied her apron. Mama, listen to me. Lock the door and don't let anyone in. I'm coming right now. The 10-minute drive to Maple Street felt like hours. Elena's ancient Honda coughed and wheezed through Chicago traffic while her mind raced with horrible possibilities. The phone call last night, the men in the alley, the mysterious stranger who'd saved her. Somehow it was all connected, and now her mother was paying the price for Danny's mistakes. She smelled the damage before she saw it. The sharp scent of broken glass mixed with the sweet, dying fragrance of destroyed flowers. Elena parked across the street from Maria's blooms and felt her heart shatter. The shop's front windows lay in glittering pieces across the sidewalk. Flower arrangements that had taken her mother hours to create were scattered like colorful confetti, their petals trampled into the concrete. The hand-painted sign that said "Family owned since 2003" hung askew, cracked down the middle. Elena found her mother sitting on the floor behind the counter, surrounded by the ruins of her life's work. Maria looked so small and fragile, like one of her own delicate orchids after a storm. Mama. Elena knelt beside her mother, pulling her into a gentle embrace. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? No, they didn't hurt me, Maria whispered. But they said such horrible things. About you. About Danny, about what happens to families who don't pay their debts. She looked up at Elena, with eyes full of confusion and fear. What debts, Mija? What did your stepbrother do? Before Elena could answer, the shop's broken door chimed as someone entered. She spun around, expecting to see the thugs returning to finish what they'd started. Instead, she saw two men in expensive suits stepping carefully through the debris. Mrs. Martinez? The older man had silver hair and kind eyes that didn't match the gun holster visible beneath his jacket. My name is Vincent Torino. We're here to help. Elena stepped protectively in front of her mother. We don't need your kind of help. Actually, you do, the younger man, also armed, began examining the damage with professional interest. The Castellanos did this. They'll be back, and next time they won't be satisfied with breaking windows. The who? Elena demanded, but Vincent was already pulling out his phone. Boss. We're at the flower shop. It's bad, a pause. Yes, sir. She's here with her mother. Both unharmed, another pause, longer this time. Understood. We'll bring them to you. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Bring us where? Who are you people? Vincent holstered his phone and gave her a look that was both apologetic and absolutely firm. Mrs. Martinez, Elena, I need you both to come with us.
Right now.
Your lives are in danger, and there's someone who wants to keep you safe. We're not going anywhere with you, Elena said, but even as she spoke, she saw a black sedan pulling up outside the destroyed shop. 3 men got out, and Elena recognized one of them. Spider, his arms still in a sling from their alley encounter. Back door, Vincent said sharply.
Now.
The next few minutes blurred together like scenes from a movie Elena never wanted to star in. Vincent and his partner, who introduced himself as Sal, ushered Elena and her mother through the shop's rear exit into a waiting SUV with tinted windows. Elena caught glimpses of the Castellano men arguing with police officers who'd arrived with suspicious timing, as if someone had called them at exactly the right moment. The SUV wound through Chicago streets Elena didn't recognize, heading north toward the wealthy suburbs. Her mother sat quietly beside her, still in shock, while Elena's mind raced with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Where are you taking us? She asked Vincent, who sat in the front passenger seat. Somewhere safe, he replied. Somewhere the Castellanos can't touch you. 20 minutes later, the SUV passed through ornate iron gates and up a circular drive that belonged in a magazine. The Romano estate rose before them like something from another world, all stone and marble and perfectly manicured grounds that screamed old money and older power. "This is where you live," Elena whispered. "This is where he lives," Vincent corrected. The front door opened before they reached it, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. The man from the alley stood silhouetted against warm golden light, no longer dressed in an expensive coat, but wearing dark slacks and a white shirt that emphasized the lean strength of his frame. His pale blue eyes found hers immediately, and she saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. "Elena," he stepped forward, his voice carrying that same calm authority she remembered. "Are you hurt?" "You," she breathed. "You're him. You're the one they were talking about." Matteo Romano, because now she was certain that's who he was, nodded slowly. "Yes." Elena felt her mother's hand squeeze hers as understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. The expensive clothes, the way hardened criminals had fled from him, the casual violence that came as naturally as breathing. Vincent and Sal weren't bodyguards, they were soldiers. And the man who'd saved her life in that alley wasn't a guardian angel. He was the devil himself. "You're Matteo Romano," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're the Mafia boss. The one they write about in the newspapers." "Among other things, yes." Elena stared at him, remembering how grateful she'd felt, how safe his coat had made her feel, how naive she'd been. "Welcome to my home," Matteo said, and despite everything, his voice still held that note of gentle protectiveness that had made her trust him in the first place. "We need to talk." The Romano estate's living room felt like a gilded cage. Elena sat on the edge of a leather sofa that probably cost more than she made in a year, watching Matteo pour brandy into crystal glasses with hands that had broken bones just to protect her. Her mother rested in an upstairs bedroom, sedated by the family doctor after her shock over the shop's destruction. "You don't have to be afraid of me," Matteo said quietly, offering her a glass. Elena stared at the amber liquid, then at the man holding it. "Don't I? You're Matteo Romano. You kill people." Sometimes he sat across from her, careful to maintain distance. "When they threaten what's mine." "Is that what I am now? Yours?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, fueled by fear and confusion and the terrible realization that part of her wanted him to say yes. Matteo's pale blue eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You're under my protection. There's a difference." "Is there?" Elena set the untouched brandy on the coffee table between them. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've trapped me in a world I never asked to be part of. The Castellanos trapped you the moment your stepbrother borrowed their money. I'm just keeping you alive." Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens. Even in her fear, she couldn't deny the sense of safety that settled over her whenever Matteo was nearby. It should have terrified her more than it did. "My mother's shop is destroyed," she said. "Her life's work gone. Because of Danny's gambling debts and your war with these Castellano people. I'll rebuild it," Matteo replied without hesitation. "Better than before. Your mother will never want for anything again." Elena spun to face him. "With blood money." "With my money. How I earned it doesn't change what it can do for your family." Before Elena could respond, Vincent Torino appeared in the doorway with the grim expression of a man bearing bad news. "Boss, the council's here. They're asking for an emergency meeting." Something flickered across Matteo's face. Annoyance, maybe, or resignation. "Tell them I'm busy." "They're insisting, sir." Said it can't wait. Matteo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Elena, Vincent will take you to your mother. Make sure she's comfortable." "What about me? Am I comfortable, or am I a prisoner?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Matteo stood slowly, and for a moment Elena saw something vulnerable in his expression, a loneliness so deep it made her chest ache despite everything. "You're whatever you choose to be," he said finally. "But you're safe." "That's not negotiable." After Elena left with Vincent, Matteo made his way to the conference room where his 5 most trusted men waited with expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. They'd built an empire together, these men, through blood and cunning and unwavering loyalty. But Elena Martinez was testing bonds that had held for decades. "This has to stop," Tony Marcelli said before Matteo could even take his seat. "The Castellanos hit 3 more of our businesses today. They're using the girl as an excuse to start a war." "They started the war when they threatened her," Matteo replied coldly. "She's nobody." Jimmy Torino slammed his fist on the table. "A waitress with a junkie's stepbrother. You're risking everything we've built for what? Some broad you met in an alley?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Matteo's pale eyes fixed on Jimmy with the kind of stare that had preceded many disappearances over the years. "Careful," Matteo said softly. Sal Benedetti leaned forward, his accountant's mind focused on practical matters. "Boss, the protection detail alone is costing us 50 grand a week. And that's before we factor in the lost revenue from the Castellano attacks. We're hemorrhaging money and manpower for a civilian who doesn't even want to be here." "The men are starting to talk," added Vincent, his voice heavy with reluctance. "They're saying you've gone soft. That you're thinking with your heart instead of your head." "And what do you think, Vincent?" Matteo asked. Vincent had served the Romano family for 20 years. He'd buried secrets and bodies with equal efficiency, had never questioned an order or shown a moment's weakness. But now he looked at his boss with something approaching pity. "I think you're in love with her," Vincent said quietly. "And love makes men do stupid things." The words hit Matteo like physical blows, not because they were wrong, but because they were so obviously right. Elena Martinez, with her dark eyes and stubborn courage, her fierce protection of her dying mother, and her refusal to be intimidated even by Chicago's most feared crime boss, had become the light he'd never known he'd been searching for in 30 years of darkness. "Cut her loose," Tony urged. "Give her some money, relocate her family somewhere safe, and walk away."
"The famiglia comes first."
"It always has. She's not just some civilian anymore," Jimmy added, his anger cooling into calculation. "The Castellanos know she matters to you. Every day she stays makes us weaker, makes you a target." Matteo listened to their arguments, understanding the logic even as he rejected every word. They were right. Elena was a weakness, a vulnerability that his enemies would exploit until it destroyed everything he'd built. The smart move, the only move that made sense from a business perspective, was to let her go. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her face in that alley, saw the gratitude and trust that no one had ever shown him before. He thought about her mother's flower shop, about Elena working double shifts to pay for medical bills, about the way she'd looked at him tonight, afraid, yes, but also drawn to the safety he could provide. "No," he said finally. "Boss," Tony began. "I said no." Matteo's voice carried the absolute authority that had kept him alive and in power for 15 years. "Elena Martinez stays under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave." The room fell silent. These were dangerous men who'd killed for far less than open defiance, but they also understood power when they saw it. Matteo Romano had made his choice, and it would stand regardless of the consequences. "The girl doesn't trust you," Vincent said quietly. "She's terrified of what you are, what you represent. You think keeping her here will change that?" Matteo met his underboss's eyes, seeing decades of loyalty warring with genuine concern. "Maybe not. But she'll be alive to hate me, which is better than the alternative." As his counsel filed out with varying degrees of resignation and frustration, Matteo remained alone with his decision and its implications. Elena Martinez was upstairs, probably planning her escape, definitely questioning every choice that had led her to his world. But she was safe. And for the first time in his life, that mattered more than anything else. Even if it cost him everything. Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest bedroom silk sheets, staring at ceiling moldings that probably cost more than her mother's medical bills, while questions churned through her mind like acid. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mateo's face, the way he looked at her with something that might have been love, if monsters were capable of such emotions. At 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and padded barefoot through the mansion's halls. The Romano estate felt different in the darkness, less like a palace and more like a fortress, with shadows that might hide watching eyes and corners that whispered of secrets. She found herself in Mateo's study, drawn by a strip of light beneath the door. He sat behind a massive oak desk, reading what looked like financial reports, a glass of bourbon forgotten at his elbow. He discarded his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with scars that told stories she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. Elena hesitated in the doorway. "I keep thinking about my stepbrother. About how this all started. Danny's gambling debts weren't your fault, weren't they?" Elena stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on Persian rugs. "I enabled him. Gave him money when he asked, let him stay with us, when he had nowhere else to go. Maybe if I'd been harder on him, he still would have gambled. Still would have borrowed from dangerous people." Mateo finally looked up, and Elena saw exhaustion in his pale eyes. "Some people are born to make destructive choices, Elena. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Like you can't save me?" The words hung between them like a challenge. Mateo set down his papers, his attention now completely focused on her. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Elena moved closer to his desk, drawn despite herself by the vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his controlled exterior. "I think you're a man who's used to taking what he wants. And for some reason you want me. And what do you want, Elena?" The question should have been simple. She should have said she wanted to go home, wanted her normal life back, wanted nothing to do with his world of violence and blood money. Instead, she found herself studying the planes of his face, remembering how safe she'd felt in that alley when he'd appeared like an avenging angel. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Check your email. Time you learned the truth about your hero." Elena's blood chilled. "It's them. The Castellanos." Mateo was around the desk in seconds, taking the phone from her trembling hands. His expression hardened as he read the message. "Don't open anything they send you. But what if?" "Elena, listen to me very carefully. These people are experts at psychological warfare. Whatever they're trying to show you, it's designed to hurt you, to turn you against me." But Elena was already moving to his laptop, her hands shaking as she typed in her email address. "If you have nothing to hide, then you won't mind me seeing it. Elena, don't." She hit enter before he could stop her. The email that loaded made her stomach drop like a stone. "Sweet Elena, time to learn how your Prince Charming really found you. Check the attachment. Everything you thought you knew was a lie. M. Castellano." The attachment was a series of photographs and documents. Elena clicked through them with growing horror, Mateo standing rigid behind her chair. The first photo showed Danny at an underground poker game, cards scattered across a felt table. The timestamp read 6 months ago. The second showed him leaving the same building where the game had been held, a building with a small bronze plaque that read, Romano Holdings, LLC. "No," Elena whispered. The documents were worse. Bank records showing wire transfers from Romano accounts to various gambling establishments. Surveillance photos of Danny meeting with men Elena now recognized as Mateo's soldiers. And worst of all, a transcript of a recorded conversation. "Danny Martinez is perfect for our purposes. Sister's clean, works regular hours, takes the same route home every night. Mother's sick, family's desperate. When the Castellanos come for their money, she'll be exactly where we need her to be. And if she doesn't ask for help, she will. I've studied her type, protective, self-sacrificing. When threatened, she'll reach for the nearest lifeline. Even if that lifeline is you, boss. Especially then. Sometimes the most effective trap is the one the prey walks into willingly." Elena's vision blurred as the pieces fell into place. Danny's sudden disappearance after months of regular contact. The way the thugs had found her in that specific alley at that exact time. Mateo's convenient presence in the shadows, ready to play hero. It was all planned, she breathed, turning to face him. Every bit of it. You've been manipulating my family for months. Mateo's face was carved from stone, but she saw truth in his silence. My stepbrother's gambling wasn't random. You fed him opportunities. You made sure he'd rack up debts with your enemies. And when they came for payment, Elena stood on unsteady legs, backing away from the desk. You were there, waiting, like some sick knight in shining armor. Elena. My mother's shop. That wasn't random either, was it? You probably owned the building, probably orchestrated the whole thing so you could swoop in and save us again. Yes, Mateo said quietly. The simple admission hit her harder than any elaborate explanation could have. Elena felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, but her faith in her own judgment, her belief that she could recognize truth when she saw it. You destroyed my family to get to me, she whispered. Used my love for my mother, my loyalty to Danny, everything good about me as weapons against me. It started that way, Mateo admitted, his voice rough. But it became something else. You became something else.
What?
Your victim? Your prize. My salvation. He took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched. Elena, I know how this looks. I know what you must think of me. But what happened in that alley, what's happening between us, that's real. That was never part of the plan. Elena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The perfect snare. That's what they called it, isn't it? Use me to trap the great Matteo Romano. Make him vulnerable through his feelings for some nobody waitress. And they were right, Matteo said, his pale eyes boring into hers. I am vulnerable. I am trapped. But not by them, by you. By the way you looked at me with gratitude instead of fear. By your courage, your loyalty to your family, your stubborn refusal to break even when everything fell apart. Elena stared at him, seeing the truth in his face even as she rejected it. You're a monster. Yes. You manipulated and destroyed innocent people. Yes. And you think I could ever forgive that? Ever trust you again? Matteo was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo from his very bones. No, he said simply. I don't think you can. But I'll protect you anyway. Because the alternative is watching you die, and that's the one thing I can't survive. Elena turned and fled from the study, her bare feet slapping against marble floors as she ran toward the stairs. Behind her, she heard the sound of crystal shattering, Matteo's bourbon glass meeting the wall, perhaps, or maybe something more valuable breaking under the weight of impossible choices. The perfect snare indeed. The Castellanos had sought to destroy Matteo Romano by making him care about someone he couldn't protect. Instead, they created something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose except the woman who now knew exactly how much of a monster he really was. Elena spent the night pacing her room like a caged animal, fury and betrayal warring with something else, something that felt dangerously like understanding. By dawn, her anger had crystallized into cold determination. She would not be anyone's pawn, not the Castellanos and certainly not Matteo Romano's. She dressed in jeans and a sweater, practical clothes for whatever came next, and made her way downstairs. The mansion felt different in daylight, less fortress, more home. She found Matteo in his study, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by empty coffee cups and papers that looked like battle plans. I want to see Danny, she said without preamble. Matteo looked up, his pale eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Elena. You found him, didn't you? That's why you were so confident about clearing his debts. Because you have him. A long pause. Then, he's in protective custody. The Castellanos would kill him if they found him first. I want to see him.
Now.
Matteo studied her face, reading something in her expression that made him nod slowly. Vincent will take you. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in Little Italy, guarded by 2 of Matteo's soldiers. Danny Martinez sat at a kitchen table, looking older than his 25 years, his hands shaking slightly from withdrawal. When he saw Elena, his face crumpled with shame. Jesus, Elena.
I'm sorry.
I'm so fucking sorry. She sat across from him, taking in the hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. Tell me the truth, Danny. All of it. The story that tumbled out was exactly what Elena had expected, and somehow worse. Danny had started gambling to escape his guilt over their stepfather's death. The Romano family had noticed his regular losses and cultivated him, offering him bigger games, better odds, more rope to hang himself with. When he tried to quit, they'd made it clear that wasn't an option. They said they just wanted information about you, Danny whispered. Where you worked, what route you took home. They said nobody would get hurt. I thought he broke down completely. I thought maybe if I helped them, they'd forgive the debt. I didn't know they were planning to use you like bait. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. But you let them anyway. I was scared. They said they'd kill me if I didn't cooperate and kill you and Mama if I ran. Danny grabbed her hands across the table. Elena, you have to believe me. I never meant for this to happen. Looking at her stepbrother, weak, addicted, and utterly broken, Elena finally understood the game that had been played around her. The Castellanos had used Danny's weaknesses against him, and Mateo had used those same weaknesses as an opportunity. Both sides had seen her family as expendable pieces on a chessboard. But she wasn't a piece anymore. Elena drove back to the Romano estate with Vincent, her mind made up. She found Mateo in the conference room with his counsel, their voices raised in heated argument that died the moment she walked in. The Castellanos just hit our warehouse on the south side, Tony Marcelli was saying. Burned it to the ground. They're escalating. Good, Elena said, drawing every eye in the room. Because so are we. Mateo half rose from his chair. Elena, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She moved to stand beside his chair, her hand falling to his shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable alliance. Marco Castellano thinks he's playing chess with human pieces. It's time to show him what happens when the queen stops pretending to be a pawn. The room fell silent. Elena could feel the weight of their stares, could see the shock and calculation in the faces of men who'd spent their lives reading power dynamics. She was claiming her place in this world, not as victim or protected asset, but as something far more dangerous. You sure about this, princess? Tony asked, his voice carefully neutral. Don't call me princess, Elena replied, her voice carrying the kind of steel that made grown men reconsider their assumptions. Call me Mrs. Romano. Mateo's hand covered hers, his fingers intertwining with certainty that felt like coming home. Clear the room, he said quietly. I need to make some phone calls. What followed was 3 days of calculated violence that reminded Chicago why the Romano name commanded respect. Warehouses burned, bank accounts emptied, and soldiers disappeared into the night. But this wasn't random destruction. It was surgical, precise, designed to cripple the Castellano operation without sparking an all-out war. Elena learned to read the city like a map of territories and allegiances. She sat in on strategy meetings, offering insights that surprised hardened criminals with their psychological accuracy. She wasn't squeamish about the violence, couldn't afford to be, but she understood its purpose and accepted it as the price of the world she'd chosen to enter. On the third night, Marco Castellano called personally to negotiate surrender. Elena listened on speakerphone as he offered to forgive Danny's debt, to withdraw from Romano territory, to pretend none of this had ever happened. Counteroffer, Elena said before Mateo could respond. You disappear. Not just from our territory, from Chicago entirely. Take your whole organization and find somewhere else to play your games. Who the fuck do you think you are? Marco snarled. Elena looked at Mateo, saw pride and something deeper in his pale blue eyes, and smiled. I'm the woman who turned the hunter into the hunted. I'm the queen who learned to play the game better than you ever did. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became a weapon itself. And if you ever threaten my family again, I'll show you exactly how creative a woman can be when it comes to revenge. 2 weeks later, the Castellano organization was a memory. Danny was in rehab in California, his debts cleared and his future secured by an account that would keep him comfortable as long as he stayed clean. Elena's mother was recovering in a private medical facility, her shop rebuilt and her treatments paid for in full. Elena stood on the terrace of the Romano estate, watching the sun set over Chicago, when Matteo joined her with 2 glasses of wine. "Any regrets?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. A month ago, she'd been a waitress struggling to pay her mother's medical bills. Now she was the acknowledged partner of Chicago's most powerful crime boss, her word carrying weight in rooms where life and death decisions were made daily. "Ask me again in a year," she said, accepting the wine. "When I've had time to see what kind of queen I really am." Matteo raised his glass in a toast. "To Elena Romano, the most dangerous woman in Chicago." "To us," she corrected, clinking her glass against his. "The king and queen of shadows." As night fell over the city, Elena Martinez, now Elena Romano in all the ways that mattered, stood beside the man who destroyed her old life to give her a new one. She'd been manipulated, betrayed, and used as a weapon against the very person she'd come to love. But she'd also learned to wield power like a blade, to command respect through intelligence and steel rather than fear. The frightened waitress was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that sometimes the only way to escape a trap was to become the one setting it. In Chicago's underworld, they would call her the Queen of Shadows. But Elena knew the truth. She hadn't been crowned by anyone else's choice. She'd taken the crown herself,